Yesterday we were talking about quantified statements. So the idea is that we would take statements and talk about them in some type of quantity. So when I say something like some books are old, what I'm really saying is it's an existential. So I'm using that backwards E. Ooh, I can't see that. Use a different color. And I'm saying I found a book and it's old. So what's the first of the two predicates? Book is a book. Do I know what the name of that book is?
No.
So I say BX. What's the other predicate? It's old. So do I know what's old? The book, but I don't know the title of the book that's old, do I? So I'm going to say OX. And when we talked about this yesterday, we said that existentials always use what operator? Not conditional, no. Conjunction. They always use a conjunction. So that's how I'm going to write that in symbolic notation. So if I wanted to say all schools are not big, all is what type of keyword? Is it universal or existential? It's universal. So it'd be universal X. What's my first predicate? Is a school. Do I know what is a school?
No.
So I'm going to use the X that we talked about. So SX. What's the second predicate?
It's not big.
Is not big. So that's a negation in there, right?
Yeah.
So I would have a negation VX. And what operator do we use for a universal?
Conditional.
We use a conditional. So remember that we're always using a conditional when we have a universal. We're always using a conjunction when we have an existential. We're always going to have two predicates. We're always going to have the first predicate and the second predicate, which we put together using the conjunction or using the conditional. So how about number 3? I've got some dogs bite. So first, tell me what type it is.
Existential.
It's existential, so I'm going to use the backwards EX. What's my first predicate?
Dogs.
Is a dog. So I'm going to say DX. And what am I connecting it with?
With bite, so it would be conjunction BX.
Right. The thing is, I need the conjunction, and then my second predicate is something that bites. Again, I don't know which thing I'm talking about, so I'm going to use the generic X to represent it. So now I'm going to do the symbols. So how do I do the symbols for all apples are not bananas? Okay, tell me how.
You do the upside down A.
Okay, so universal X.
Then in the next parentheses you would have AX. Conditional BX.
BX. Okay. God bless you. Any questions on that? So I want to do one more of these. Take a look at number 6. It's a little bit different because here we're saying nobody. So my question for you is nobody universal or is nobody existential? It's universal. So I'm going to go directly on here and just say that's universal. Now the thing is, I'm really saying no body, right? Or no one, no person. That's really what I'm saying. So my first predicate has to do something with being a person. So let's go ahead and say PX. And then what's my second predicate? Perform magic. So let's say MX for magic. And again, because this is a universal, what do I do to connect these two predicates? A conditional. So I wanted to go into this practice of, okay, if I give you a sentence, can you write it in symbols? The second thing I want to talk about are negations, because if you notice over here, I'm wanting the negations of the exact same sentences on 11 through 20. So here, I want the negation of this statement. Well, the opposite of an existential is a
Universal.
Universal. And the opposite of universal is existential. So I want to remind you of something before we continue this. We had something called denying the consequent. And that said that if I wanted the opposite of a conditional, that was logically equivalent to what?
It would be P conditional or conjunction negation Q.
Right. I have to negate the consequent, so it's negation Q, and it changes it to a conjunction. So notice if I want the opposite of a universal, I get an existential. If I want the opposite of a conditional, I'm going to end up with a conjunction. So this is, and what's the opposite of negation BX? What happens when I deny that consequent? It just becomes BX. Now I say that, but what happens if I negate a negation?
Then it would be a positive. It would not. The opposite of negation would be a positive. Yeah.
Right. That's just double negation, right? If I negate a negation, both the negations go away. That means that if I wanted the opposite of P conjunction Q, I know that it's equal to a disjunction because of De Morgan's law, but it's also going to be equal to P conditional negation Q by that same denying the consequent. Yes, ma'am?
There's one question I missed. It says to write it in words, so do we write it in words or do we write it in symbols?
Well, I want to write it in symbols first, and then I'm going to write it in words.
Okay.
So I want to make sure everyone knows how to translate to the symbols, and then we're going to talk about how to write these in words. And so this is the key part here. The idea is that the opposite of a conjunction, yeah, it's a disjunction because of De Morgan's law, but can't we change a disjunction to a conditional by denying the antecedent?
Yes.
So I can either do two steps to get it to a conditional, or if I think of double negation, I'm really just doing one step. The opposite of a conjunction would also give me a conditional. And I really, really, really want a conditional because it's universal. So are they still books?
Yes.
Yes. Are they still old?
Yes.
If I want the opposite of some books are old, I'm looking for books that are not old. So I want negation O, X. So now let's address her question. She wanted to write this in sentences. So what is this universal? What word is universal? All. All what? Books are not old. On number 12, I've got existential. So what's the key word? Some. So some schools are big. God bless you. Now, I can write these symbolically, but now we should be able to make the transition. What's the opposite of some dogs bite? It's going to be all dogs don't bite. Notice, are they still dogs? Does the first part ever change? The first predicate never changes. What changes is the second predicate. So the opposite of some dogs bite or all dogs don't bite. The opposite of some boys like cowboys? All boys don't like cowboys. Let's say no boys like cowboys. Notice that when I say no boys like cowboys, that's the negation. I don't need to put double negation. I don't need to say no boys don't like cowboys, because then that just doesn't make good English. All right, number 15, I've got no apples are bananas. How do I change that? First, tell me what my keyword is.
No.
My keyword is no. If I want the negation of it, no becomes no. Some. Remember, no is a universal. So I want the opposite of a universal, so I want an existential. I want some. Some what? Apples. Well, I already had a negation in here. I want to get rid of the negation. So some apples are bananas. Now, please note, some of these sentences will not make sense. You'll know that some of these sentences are false, but that's okay. We're asking for the negation of things that we kind of agree are true. No apples are bananas, so the negation should be kind of silly. Some apples are bananas. Nobody can perform magic. Nobody is universal, so what's the opposite of universal? Existential. So we're going to say some
people
somebody or some people
can perform magic.
Can perform magic. So on tomorrow's quiz, I have this question for you. If I give you a sentence, can you write it in symbols?
Yes.
Yes. If I give you a symbol, can you write a sentence?
Yes.
Yes. If I give you a sentence, can you write the negation of that sentence?
Yes.
Okay? So on tomorrow's quiz, I'm going to expect sentences like that. I'm going to expect symbols like that. That's what we're headed for. So that's the first part of today's lesson. For the second part of today's lesson, I want to talk about compound sentences. When we talk about compound sentences in our language arts class, what are we talking about? How do you make a sentence a compound sentence?
Using and or.
Using and or. You're putting two simple statements together to make a compound statement. So if I have compound quantified sentences, example, all cats have fur and some dogs are loud. Okay? All cats have fur and some dogs are loud. So tell me how to write this part, all cats have furs, all cats have fur, symbolically. Tell me how to write it. Start with that first word, all. Okay, universal. So universal X. What's my first predicate?
CX.
CX. They are cats. Has to be a conditional because universals are always conditional. FX. Has fur.
Then you have a conjunction.
Now I've got a conjunction because all cats have fur and.
And then you have another parenthesis line.
And now I have another existential X for some.
DX.
Some dogs, so DX.
And then the conjunction.
It's a conjunction.
LX.
LX. So what I've got here is I've got all cats have fur and some dogs are loud. I can write this symbolically using the universal and existential, using the predicates, and because I'm connecting them with an and, I'm going to use the conjunction. So then I have this question for you. What happens if I negate the whole thing?
Then it would be an existential is the first one, and then.
Okay, I've got to negate the first term, right?
Yes.
So existential X, denying the consequence, so CX stays the same. Conjunction, negation FX. De Morgan's law says we change the conjunction to a disjunction. And De Morgan's law says we take the negative of this as well. So what's the negation of this? The existential becomes universal. I still need to deny the consequent. I'm still talking about dogs, right?
Yes.
The first part doesn't change. Okay. So I can take a compound statement and I can negate it using De Morgan's law. So now I'm ready to write this sentence. So how would I write this sentence? It's existential. How do I write that? Some cats negation, so don't have fur or have no fur.
Or
Or here, because I'm doing the negation of a compound statement, I end up with De Morgan's law happening here. I've got some cats don't have fur, or all dogs are not loud. Let's try another example of this. So let's say I have some PAs are Spurs fans, or all students have pink hair. Okay, so I want to write this in symbolic form first.
So you have existential.
Okay, some becomes existential.
Then you would have PX.
PX, because some PAs. Conjunction.
SF.
For Spurs fans, okay. Or. Disjunction.
AX.
Universal X.
Then you have SF.
Now, I may not want to use S because S currently means Spurs fan. So give me a different letter for students. T. Okay.
Then you would have conditional PX.
Well, I don't want to use P because P is PA. Okay. So, okay. K for pink. So if I want to negate this whole thing, what happens? What happens to the existential?
Universal.
It becomes universal, universal X.
PX.
They are still PAs, right?
Conditional negation XX.
They just don't like the Spurs anymore. Tisk, tisk. And, right? Universal becomes existential.
PX.
They are still students. They just don't have pink hair anymore. So now when we write this sentence, this becomes what? All PAs are not Spurs fans.
And some students have art.
Some students don't have pink hair. Make sense?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So I want to do one more of these. So if all hamsters are brown, then some cats eat mice.
Oh, I get this one.
Okay? So tell me what to do.
You do universal X.
Universal X for the all.
HX.
For hamsters.
Conditional BX.
Uh-huh.
Then you would have a conditional between it.
Right, because this is an if-then statement, I am going to have a conditional between these.
And then you have existential X.
Existential X, some cats eat mice.
CX.
CX.
Conjunction.
MX. MX. Now, I want the negation of this whole thing.
Which would be
Yes.
Well, you would change it to an existential. That one's an existential.
Well, hold on. What's the opposite of a conditional?
I know. I was trying to get to that. You would have to do denying the antecedent.
Nope.
No, you have to stay denying consequence.
Denying the consequent, yeah. So this universal doesn't change because that's my antecedent. This is what comes first in a conditional statement.
Yes, that means we.
So this stays exactly the same. Universal X, HX, conditional BX. All hamsters are brown stays the same. That antecedent.
Then you would have to change the symbol to a conjunction.
It becomes a conjunction because of denying the consequent.
Universal X.
Now it's universal.
CX.
They are still cats.
Negated MX.
They just don't like mice anymore.
Which would mean if.
No, there's no if anymore.
Oh, no, not anymore. Sorry. All hamsters are brown. And
And
all cats don't eat mice.
don't eat mice. Now that's the tricky one, right? The opposite of a conditional, we have to remember that it uses one of those special rules. It uses denying the consequent. I need to make sure that my antecedent doesn't change. So I started off with all hamsters are brown, and I ended up with all hamsters are brown. That part doesn't change. That's important. When we're looking at a conditional, when we want to negate a conditional, I need to make sure that that part doesn't change. Yes, ma'am?
Do we have a test next week?
We have a test on Thursday, and I'm going to hand out the review at the end of class.
Okay.
We also have a quiz tomorrow over these quantified statements.
Do I have this Thursday?
We have a test this Thursday. Yes, I'm going to give you all the review today at the end of class. We're going to go over the review tomorrow.
And is that what we have for homework for review?
There is. Last thing I want to talk about today, but this will take about 20 minutes to talk about this, is a rule called instantiation. Because we've been talking about quantified statements. We've been talking about all, or we've been talking about none, or we've been talking about some. So when I give you all cats have fur, y'all should be able to tell me how to write that as a symbol. So how do I write that symbolically?
Universal X.
Universal X,
CS.
CX, conditional FX, right? Remember, universals always have conditionals. Garfield is a cat. Who is a cat?
Garfield.
What's the predicate? No, Garfield is the subject. What's the predicate? Is a cat. Who is a cat?
Garfield.
Garfield. This is one of our examples from yesterday, right?
Yes, sir.
Therefore, Garfield has fur. How do I write that? What's the predicate? No, Garfield is still the subject. What's the predicate? Has fur. Who has fur? Garfield. But I had to use that scary word. Therefore. And I only use therefore when we're talking about what? Conclusions to an argument, right? So we have 2 column proofs coming up again. So let's talk about that. Here's my first premise. All cats have fur. Period. Here's my second premise. Garfield is a cat. And then I hit that nasty word therefore, which meant what? That's my conclusion. Garfield has fur.
Oh,
So if I'm going to do a 2 column proof, where do I start?
you start with the universal statement.
Okay. Universal X, CX, conditional FX. And that's true because it's a premise.
Second premise would be C. Garfield.
C. Garfield. And that's good because talk about universal X, I'm talking about all cats. I don't want to talk about all cats. Who do I want to talk about? I want to talk about Garfield. Why did we use X?
Because it said all.
It said all, and there's no way for me to know the name of every cat on Earth. But I don't have to know the name of every cat on Earth. Who do I need to know? I need to know Garfield. So when I say instantiation, what I'm doing is I'm replacing X with the subject. Who is the subject of this argument? Garfield. We're talking about Garfield, right? Do I want to write all Garfields?
No.
There is one Garfield. All I want to do is I want to say C Garfield, conditional F Garfield. When we do instantiation, all I'm doing is I'm replacing X with the subject of our argument. So in this case, I'm replacing X with Garfield. By the way, that was instantiation on 1. That means I used up step 1. Gosh, it's so helpful to mark the steps that we've used up. What are the only steps I have left? 2 and 3. And one of those is a conditional. Gosh, I feel like conditionals should have like special treatment or something. Where do conditionals always go?
At the very beginning.
At the very beginning, right? Modus ponens has P conditional Q. Modus tollens has P conditional Q. Hypothetical syllogism starts with P conditional Q. Conditionals always go first. So if I do the conjunction of 3 and 2, then what I've got is I've got C Garfield, conditional F Garfield, and C Garfield. So I have a conditional and the antecedent. Gosh, I feel like that's one of our special rules, like modus something or other. Is it modus ponens or modus tollens or hypothetical syllogism? Is it the same as the antecedent or is it the opposite of the consequent? Oh, so this is modus ponens on step 4. So if this is the same, then my conclusion is going to be what? F Garfield. So I'm going to say that no dogs are purple. Sally is purple. Therefore, Sally is not a dog. So how do I write, God bless you, my premises? Premise 1. No dogs are purple. It's universal, right? I searched the entire world, looked at every single dog, and you know what? None of them were purple. Universal X. Are they still dogs, though?
Yes.
Yeah, they're still dogs. They're just not what?
Control PX. Purple.
Well, they're not purple.
Negated.
So negated PX, yeah. Second premise. Sally is purple. What's the predicate? No, Sally is the subject. Is purple. Who's purple? So I'm going to write P Sally. Therefore, Sally is not a dog. What's the predicate? Is not a dog. Negation dx. Who's not a dog? So it's not negation dx, it's negation d Sally. So any questions about where I got these two premises or the conclusion from? Okay. This first one is just what we've been doing yesterday and today with these quantified statements. These last two are predicate statements. I have to remember I've got a subject and a predicate. I use a main capital letter for the predicate, and I put my subject in a subscript down below. So, two-column proofs. What's my first statement? Universal X, dx, conditional, not px, and it's true because it's a premise. What's my second premise? P Sally, and it's a premise. Do I want to talk about all dogs? No. Who is the one thing that I want to talk about? Sally. So my instantiation is going to replace X with Sally. D Sally, conditional negation P Sally. And I'm not talking about all Sallys. There's just one Sally. So I'm not going to use universal. It's just D-Sally conditional negation. So now we do the conjunction of 3 and 2. Why does 3 come first?
Conditional.
Conditionals always come first. So I'm going to have D-Sally, conditional negation P-Sally, and P-Sally. And then I need to ask myself, is that modus ponens or modus tollens or a hypothetical syllogism? That's modus tollens. How do you know that's modus tollens?
Because it's the consequence negated.
Yeah, my consequent is negation P-Sally. I have the opposite of that, which is just plain old P-Sally. So that's modus tollens. Modus tollens gives me what as my conclusion? Gives me the opposite of my antecedent. So I get negation D, Sally. Instantiation replaces the subject. Instead of talking about all or none or some, I'm talking about one. I'm talking about Sally. I'm talking about Garfield. I'm talking about Fred. I'm talking about one particular thing. I'm replacing X with the subject. And once I replace X with the subject, it'll match my other premise. Once I replace X with the subject, it's going to match my other premise, and I can use modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism. This only works for universals. Why? Why does this only work for universals?
Because you must have all of them in the whole universe. You only have every single one of that.
Actually, it's a very straightforward reason. What does modus ponens start with? Conditional. What does modus tollens start with? Conditional. What do universals have? What do existentials have? Conjunction. If I have an existential, I'm going to have to use theorem 8a. Ew. So we'll just use